It's October. The leaves are changing color. There's a chill in the air. You start to notice pumpkins and skeletons on every front lawn. Ah yes, it's that time of year again. The perfect time of year to talk about heart palpitation-inducing romance. It's cuffing season, baby. Pull those chunky nut sweaters on, get yourself a hot apple cider, and cuddle up to your partners. But this ain't your Judd Apatow kind of romance. No, no, no. Today, we are talking about shoujo romance. It's unfortunate that often in my quest to defend shoujo from the naysayers, I have to remove shoujo from romance. Many people find romance as a genre to be contrived or boring, but it's always been an amazing way to get in touch with your own emotions and discover your own identity. It's also an amazing genre to explore character dynamics and people. Maybe it doesn't have the flashy action scenes of a series like Jujutsu Kaisen, but it does let you see into the psyche of someone who's different from you and you may have never related to before. Romance is not what makes shoujo, but the romance in shoujo is incredibly well done. Shoujo romance is incredibly near and dear to my heart. I grew up with these types of series. Lovely Complex, High School Debut, Dengeki Daisy. I spent late nights on my family's desktop computer on questionable sites trying to consume any manga that could just give me chest pains in the best kind of way. This kind of media has given me a huge comfort in times where I felt incredibly alone. The characters and their relationships with others in their world gave me hope for my own life. I used to act like I was emotionless and cold-hearted as a teen, but nothing could get me giddier than two characters outwardly showing affection to each other. There's no better feeling than the butterflies in your stomach that you have no other way to get out of your system than kick your feet and squeal. However, it's not like shoujo is the only demographic of manga to do romance. Plenty of other demographics have romance series of their own. Shonen romance in particular has been growing in popularity over the past 3 years because of their successful anime adaptations. So what makes me attached to shoujo romance specifically? What in my mind makes it so special? Well, it really comes down to the simple matter of the intimacy that is created in these series. The intimacy of shoujo romance is one of the many traits that draw people into manga of this genre. There's a vulnerability portrayed between two characters that we don't often get to see in full force when reading other types of manga. This could be two characters about to interlock their fingers for the first time, where we see 3 panels of gradual movement before they eventually hold hands. It could be the moment before a kiss, where we see the character with their eyes closed feeling the breath of their partner. It's the focus on these small details that can really draw out a wealth of emotion from the reader. The biggest example of how intimacy and a focus on small details is such a pivotal role in shoujo romance would be a series like A Sign of Affection. This manga follows a college student named Yuki who is deaf and falls in love with a well-traveled man named Itsuomi. While the mangaka duo Sumori Shita have always operated on a show-don't-tell type of story making, the premise of A Sign of Affection and the personalities of the characters lends to this way of story making even further. Itsuomi is slowly learning sign language to communicate with Yuki, and while he can't always convey his thoughts well, he can still show them. Much of the romance in this series has a very quiet intimacy about it, with a heavy focus on hands to show the sign language, but also to show the connection between Yuki and Itsuomi. Panels where we see the gradual movement of him putting his hand over hers to reassure her, or a full 2 pages of him kissing her hands to show his affection. You get the feeling that you're watching these actions play out in slow motion, savoring every detail before you get the eventual conclusion. This focus on detail immerses you in the moment as a reader, making you personally feel connected to the intimacy by getting your heart to start beating like you tried to learn the Rosalia dance. Intimacy is a core part of what makes shoujo romance so special, but intimacy itself won't always be able to get you as the reader engaged in a character-focused story. If you aren't connecting with the character that you're reading about, you're obviously not going to get invested into their romance. There's actually a much deeper reason why these intimate moments hit us so hard in shoujo. While we do get intimate moments like this outside of the demographic, the thing that really sets it apart is the 3 key ways of which shoujo itself operates as a demographic. These 3 things being empathy-driven storytelling, introspective dialogue, and the elusive feminine gaze. To start, shoujo as a demographic is seen to be more empathy or character-driven. Stories like these want to connect the characters to the reader first and foremost, not only hoping to get the reader to relate to the character, but also empathizing with whatever their struggle may be. A story like My Sweet Girl wants you to empathize with the main heroine's struggle with her body image issues. Or you have a series like My Love Mix-Up that wants you to feel for Aoki's contemplation of his sexuality. The more we want to see a character succeed in life, the more we feel personally connected to them. The fact that shoujo is often more character-driven leads to interactions taking front and center. Even in something incredibly goofy like Furare Girl, the romance is always taken seriously because it wants you to connect to the two main characters and know that they are in love. An entire chapter could be filled with a bunch of parody gags, but by the last few pages, you'll still get a moment of intense emotional vulnerability. This is one of the reasons why I particularly love this romance comedy, because while it is very comedy heavy, it still uses the comedy to connect you to the character. The comedy will end up actually serving as plot points in the development of their emotions and relationship. In a book called Shoujo Across Media by Jacqueline Burnt, they note that this is one of the big differences that set shoujo apart. There's a heavy emphasis on interpersonal relationships in the majority of shoujo, that can range anywhere from family to friends to lovers. Sure, we love the romance in shoujo romance, but we also love to see the characters interact with their surroundings in a way that feels relatable to us. Fights with a friend or arguing with a parent over something menial is a near universal experience. Everything from speech patterns, minuscule details in the background, or character thoughts are meant to help the reader feel more connected to the world that the character is in. The mangaka will waste no opportunity to open the reader up to feel and experience what they are showing on page. What adds to this empathy-driven storytelling that is utilized in shoujo romance even further is the use of introspective dialogue. This type of speech in shoujo isn't just the main character having regular thoughts like, I wonder what they think about me, but rather they seek to formulate words to an almost indescribable feeling. This type of dialogue on page are the characters' deepest desires and feelings that they could never put into coherent sentences. It happens outside of text bubbles and can even span across entire pages during pivotal moments of development. Sometimes they can even be along the lines of poetry or lyricism, where words like bubbling, burning, or breeze are mentioned. This type of dialogue works extremely well in romance, where we can see the intensity of emotions put into words. In the recent chapters of the series Futari Dekoi wo Suiryu, there's moments where the female lead can't even put her feelings for the male lead into words. However, with the introspective narrative, we see that while she may not be saying anything, she's overflowing with love. She herself thinks that telling him she likes him will never be enough to convey the emotion that she is feeling. We as people can't always describe our own emotions as we are feeling them, or even put thoughts into words at times. But shoujo romance gives us a viewfinder into the thoughts that we can't speak into existence ourselves. Introspection in shoujo, and especially shoujo romance, is what helps to give us insight into emotions that we may not have known we had. They can even guide us to put words to our own feelings. Shoujo's ability to bring this out in people is probably why so many manga will make jokes about how shoujo is the Bible to romance. While shoujo isn't just romance, the way that it taps into our emotions in such a deep way is very unique to this demographic. It draws out the vulnerability of the reader by not just showing us physical intimacy, but emotional intimacy as well. This is due in part to the fact that shoujo is inherently the feminine gaze, or at the very least, the lack of the male gaze. Now, the feminine gaze is hard to pin down as a concept, since the term was coined in direct opposition to the male gaze, although the meaning itself isn't the direct opposite. The male gaze being a perspective in media or culture where women are being objectified or used for their physical appearance. The person who first used this term, Laura Mulvey, states that the determining male gaze projects its fantasy onto the female form, which is styled accordingly. Because of the nature of shonen and shoujo, shonen is inherently the male gaze. Even if a female lead does have objective and narrative purpose, her body can still be used in a way to entice the reader through visual framing. In a video by Wit and Folly called The Feminine Gaze and Transformative Stories, they break down the points that Laura Mulvey made about the male gaze, stating that even if women are the subject of the story, they are still objects of male desire by the men in the story or the audience reading. This portrayal of women in media masculinizes the audience regardless of identity. While these terms are most often used for film, they can also be attributed to manga as well, since men are creating a gaze on their female characters in a very similar way. Upskirt shots, downward gazing angles, or close-up on cleavage are lingered on or specifically pointed out when the female character is a subject to a man's gaze. Hello, editing me here. I just want to point out real quick that women can also contribute to the masculine gaze, especially ones who work in shonen and seinen when they are specifically writing for a male audience. The most prominent example of this would definitely be My Dress Up Darling, which is written by a woman, but is very focused on the masculine gaze. And before we all shout, oh, shoujo does this too on the opposite spectrum, they objectify men, it's not true, especially in regards to what we know as the feminine gaze. The gaze is not about showing the man as the object, but rather a pendulum between the characters being the subject and the desire. In a heterosexual romance story, this could be the female lead desiring the man, and the man in turn desiring her. In the same video by Wit and Folly, they make a really great point that in feminine telling of stories, the characters are objectified when they want to be, thus giving agency to any character in their own stories over their bodies and just as how they are viewed as the subject. A keynote by writer and director Joey Soloway gives us 3 main factors of what makes up the feminine gaze: the feeling camera, the gazed gaze, and returning the gaze, all of which are so often used in shoujo romance manga. The feeling camera is prioritizing emotion over action, which we've already discussed in depth already, as well as returning the gaze, which is when we see the subject tell the audience how they feel about being seen. Shoujo and shoujo romance are constantly using the feeling camera due to the empathy-driven storytelling and introspective narrative. Panels lingering on intimacy is what prioritizes emotions in these types of works. In kind, returning the gaze in film may be through monologue, but in shoujo they can use speaking, thinking, or the introspective desires that they show us. The gazed gaze is another use of feminine gaze that shoujo manga employs wonderfully. We often see how the main character looks at their love interest and vice versa by being the subject of their gaze. Shoujo's use of big eyes is also what helps show the emotion even further on a character's face and connect us as the reader on a more deeper emotional level. We are looking at the character's eyes directly and can see every sparkle and detail. The audience feels the emotion coming through just the eyes of the character and directly putting us into the shoes of the person who is being viewed. The use of the feminine gaze in shoujo is able to not only put us in the subject's shoes, but in other characters' shoes as well. We are constantly being connected by different threads of emotion and vulnerability to several characters at the same time, getting introspection from the main character as well as the main character's partner or love interest, understanding why one is being desired by the other. We become intimately knowledgeable with the ins and outs of a character through their gaze and their thoughts. It is through the feminine gaze in shoujo that we can see the flaws and cracks of people with any identity. All these aspects of shoujo in concurrence with each other may be off-putting for people who are used to the masculine gaze. They may be uncomfortable with seeing women have agency over their bodies. They may not like how vulnerable a series makes them feel. Or they may think that the femininity oozing off of the page is unappealing. In the same way that the masculine gaze masculinizes the audience, the feminine gaze feminizes them, which to many people may be inherently uncomfortable. Although to so many others who love shoujo romance, this is exactly why we love it so much. I often see the argument that shoujo romance is just wish fulfillment for young girls, But what's so wrong with a form of media that makes women feel desired, but not objectified? So much of the intimacy in shoujo romance comes from a deep emotional bond between two characters. They understand each other, they make each other feel loved, and we as the audience get to experience this seemingly immeasurable connection. Maybe shoujo romance is just wish fulfillment, but it's wish fulfillment in a way that women will be treated as an equal in a heterosexual relationship to their partner. Women in shoujo are not just seen as conquests to be won, but have agency over their own stories and desires, even being the ones to chase after love themselves and work hard for what they want in life. Taking it a step further, heroines in heterosexual shoujo romance stories get to set their own sexual boundaries in their relationship and what they're comfortable with at the time. Many of these aspects that I just mentioned, empathy, introspection, and the feminine gaze, can be found in other romance stories as well. It's not like shoujo romance is the only one to have these, like I've mentioned before. However, because of the history of shoujo, the culture around it, and the women who make it, we see every one of these aspects melded together. It's not often that we get to be tied to a female character in every facet of their life, while also being tied to their counterpart in the exact same way. We get to be engaged in their thoughts, their deepest desires, or even their profound pain. The reason shoujo is so intimate is because we feel the character on every sensory level. Shoujo romance is special. If you don't like romance, that's okay. Not everyone will. But there's a vulnerability to shoujo romance when it's presented in its best forms that engages the reader in a way they may never have felt prior. Shoujo romance wants you intimately familiar with the hands of a character, the shape of their nose, the details of their hair. You're spectating in a way as if you yourself are viewing your partner with unending love. This intimacy and desire in all its forms is what makes shoujo romance such a unique and beautiful form of media.